Welcome to the Last in Line podcast, where we discuss faith, hope, and truth in the lives of amazing servant leaders. You are in the right place if you crave purpose and if you hunger for a life of significance. This podcast applies biblical truth to our daily lives, and we pray that you walk away encouraged and inspired. This is the Last in Line podcast.
Many of you know the company FranklinCovey and their presence in leadership, developing teams, culture, resources. They are really the world's sought after resource for leadership training and development. Well, we have on our show someone who's been an executive vice president, a chief marketing officer, now serves as the role of senior advisor on thought leadership. His name is Scott Miller, and we're honored to have him here on Last in Line podcast. He is a highly sought after speaker, author, and he's a podcast host of their podcast On Leadership is the name of it. And it's the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. He, like I said, is a Wall Street Journal bestselling author. And we're going to talk about his most recent book, Career on Course. This book talks about 10 strategies to take your career from accidental to intentional. He talks about relationships, interpersonal connections within a team. He talks about identifying your reasons for pursuing a career and what you do once you're inside an organization and how to become efficient or effective. He talks about the differences there. He talks about some of the characteristics for people that prosper and flourish in their careers, being deliberate, being intentional, role ownership. So we're going to talk about 4 of the 10 strategies that jumped out at me most. All 10 are crucial and key and important, but we only have time to cover a few. So I hope you enjoy this. Scott, again, high-level author, high-level speaker, C-Suite in the biggest leadership company in the world. We're honored to have him. So help me welcome Scott Miller to Last in Line podcast. Scott Miller, thank you for joining us on Last in Line Leadership Podcast. Welcome, sir.
John, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for the platform and the spotlight. Honored to be here.
Man, we're honored to highlight and showcase talent. And your resume speaks for itself, so we won't go into the minutia of all of it, but we will highlight some of it. And your newest book, I think, is it your newest book, The Career on Course?
My seventh
Man, that
book
was the one that kind of jumped out, and I think we're going to hone in on today. But I can't let you get off the hook. I do this with all my guests, and we're going to do something fun in a minute after we get to know you and peel back the layers on Scott. So take us back, maybe not too far, but maybe like when you were like 1.5, 2 years old. No. Give us an idea of your home life. Maybe here's a deep question for you. I know we laughed a little off camera, but I want to go deep first. Maybe something, what season, what person, maybe what instance left most of a mark on you kind of coming up in your teenage years, would you say, in your home life, your school?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, it's my paternal grandmother. So my mother's parents both died prior to my birth. Both were alcoholics, and my mother basically raised herself. My father's dad died when he was 10 of cancer, and his twin brother caught polio and spent a decade in an iron lung and died. So it was my father's mother who was caring for my dad's twin brother. And my father is a Catholic. I am Catholic. My wife is not, but we're raising our sons Catholic. And my grandmother was a devout Catholic in Minnesota. And the Knights of Columbus, a very well-known Catholic service organization, came to her home and offered to underwrite the cost of this iron lung for her son that was, suffering and eventually succumbed to polio. And now she's a widow. Her husband had died, 8 years earlier. She was working as a nurse at a psychiatric hospital, but like a nurse's aide. Money was tight. She was widowed. The Knights of Columbus came to her home and offered to pay for the iron lung. And Agnes Miller, I might cry, Agnes Miller said, "Go next door. They need it more than me." And the
Mm,
next door neighbors were Protestants. Now you have to understand, uh, 80 years ago in Minnesota, the Protestants and the Catholics walked to church on the opposite sides of the street.
yeah.
Christians walked on different sidewalks.
Yeah.
And my grandmother said, I can afford it. She could not. She said, because their son also, or daughter, had polio. And to me, it instilled in me a sense of abundance, of gratitude, of generosity, of ecumenicism. I was raised in a dual faith family. My mother is Methodist. My father was Catholic. Complications there, right? Catholics usually gain spirituality upbringing of their children, right? By
Mm,
decree. If you want to be
mm,
married in a Catholic church. Anyway, it was my grandmother who I learned this story from in a moment of humility that has been a guiding force in my life to be grateful and abundant and try my best to not have a scarce mentality, but to have an abundance mentality.
yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting what moments in time actually just like imprint on our soul, on our spirit, on our heart, on our minds. And then we carry, even if we're not aware always that that's why we're doing something, it becomes part of the character that directs us, right? Our moral compass kind of derives from instances like that. And you're like, okay, this is what good looks like when it comes to serving, when it comes to giving, when it comes to, hey, there will be enough, right? Like the God we serve can provide for all of us. Give it to them. I'll go get mine, right? And so I mean, you've clearly paved a way and were a forerunner in the leadership space when you went to work, obviously for Franklin Covey. Maybe what mentors did you have coming up? I mean, I'm sure the list is long, but maybe as a young adult, maybe give us an idea who was most impressionable after that particular story. Like as you started getting into your maybe more formative years of adulthood. So, did you have any of those? Like, give us some ideas of what that good looked like.
Yeah, I am passionate about the topic of mentorship. My sixth book was titled The Ultimate Guide to
Mm,
Great Mentorship. I don't know that I've ever had any formal mentors. Like I said, would you be my mentor? I've had a lot of informal mentors. Patrice Hobby, who was a neighbor who was a very successful real estate entrepreneur in Orlando, Florida, where I am from. Sam Romeo, who was my 12th grade student council advisor. I was the student body president of my council. He had a more enormous
wow.
impact on me. Frank Stansberry was a communication professor at Rollins College, where I earned my undergraduate education. That was a
Yeah.
PR professional that went on to help me secure my first job at the Walt Disney Company for 4 years. Chuck Farnsworth, who was the man who hired me at Stephen Covey's company, who to this day is a very dear friend and a
Yeah.
mentor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, countless people that have usually believed in me more than I believed in myself. They usually had a couple of take me out to the woodshed conversations and say,
Yeah.
okay, you will not do this again. You will not say that again. This
Yeah.
is going to. So I've had a lot of woodshed
Yeah.
conversations where really fine people took me out and well took
Well,
me to the woodshed.
yeah. Let me
And
let me jump in real quick and ask you what do you feel like was that about you that maybe drew them to
yeah,
taking an interest, and
yeah,
then maybe was there a common thread in those people that you thought was kind of a shining star in their
sure.
personality?
I'll answer it in reverse order. The red thread, if you will, was they all had an abundance mentality, right? They all had someone that had believed in them more than they believed in themselves, and they saw me as a worthy recipient.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they saw in me was a young guy with an indefatigable work ethic, a guy that was capable of taking feedback and offering apologies, a guy whose intent rarely matched his technique, right? It was perhaps being a jackass in the workplace, but I didn't wake up that day thinking I wanted to be a jackass. I was just misdirected or uninformed or immature. So I think what they saw in me was a guy that had great potential, but just needed to be shepherded along the way, right? Kind of the theme
Yeah.
of your program. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been asked those questions before, but that's my kind of spontaneous
Well,
answer.
that's good. No, I'm glad. And that's my goal, hopefully, is to maybe get a little outside the box as opposed to some of the other,
Yeah.
interviews you've done. I like to be a little different and swim against the current on some stuff. I will say, I wonder and I could be totally off base here, but I wonder if there's a paradox uh, element to the abundance mindset you talk about, but then that just obsessive work ethic, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, that's what I'm calling it, but uh, is there an element of I'm running so fast because I don't want the scarcity aspect to creep in? Because we talk about abundance, right? We're not fearful of scarcity, but at the same time I think that maybe a little bit of healthy fear keeps us hungry. Would you agree? And then pushes us in that direction of abundance. So tell me if I'm off base. That seems paradoxical. I don't know.
I'm not sure if you're off base, but as you were talking, this is what was going through my mind. Um, I live in the future.
Mm.
I don't live in the past. But as a result of living in the future, I don't live in the present. And that isn't a good thing. That's an area which I have a lot of work. I am the sole provider for my family. My wife and I have a fairly traditional marriage by choice. My wife is better educated than I am, a 12-year difference between us. And when we got married 15 years ago, we made a decision that we wanted to raise our family like we were raised. Our
Mm.
parents were fairly traditional. Our mothers chose to stay home and raise the family, and the husbands went out and earned the living. And my wife could very much, out earn me if we chose that. But we decided if we're going to have children, we wanted one of us to stay home, and it made sense that my wife would. So my wife is a full-time mom, full-time
Mm-hmm.
caregiver, right? And to her horror, does probably 6 loads of laundry a day. We have 3 boys that are 9, 13, and 14. And so my wife is, cooking meals and PTA meetings and homework and all that. My point is, I think the reason I'm running so fast and I have such a strong work ethic is I take my responsibility as financial provider to
Mm-hmm.
4 people who are 100% dependent upon me very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think my constant acceleration, my constant work ethic, my motion is both good and bad. As I take
Mm-hmm.
that role of provider, sometimes maybe too seriously, because my children and my wife don't get the best of me all the time.
Yeah,
But I'm just being very honest
that
and
makes sense.
transparent. Apparently they want to go to college.
That makes
Apparently they like to have braces. Apparently
Yep.
they want tennis lessons. Apparently they don't
Yeah,
want to go to church nude, right? I mean, so just all these practical things, you
that's
get the
right.
point. I mean, we go to church on Sunday and we dress our best, and
Right.
that doesn't come free. Either does, our
Yeah.
tithing. So I take all
Yeah.
of that to say, I think there's ups and downs of it, but I was taught a very strong work ethic from my parents. My mother was a classic representation of the Protestant work ethic, although she didn't work outside the home. She was very diligent about keeping
Mm-hmm.
a home and raising my brother and I. So
Yeah.
maybe a long answer to your
It's
question.
good. No.
It's just true what I said is that it's a true representation of my life.
Yeah, and I didn't plan to really go there, but as you were talking about abundance, I noticed that a commonality in some of the really high achievers that I talked to really either came from some, I don't know if it was meager circumstances or they just were determined that they weren't going to X, right? I wasn't going to lack in this, so I'm always going full tilt here. Now, you mentioned the moment, and sometimes the present escapes you, but we're going to go into some of that too, I think, in a minute. But
Can I
I
can I
got
can I add to
yeah,
that for a moment?
yeah.
I never interrupt the host,
You're
but you got me
perfectly
thinking of
fine.
something. A half an hour ago, I was going to be late to this podcast. I was getting a haircut because I hadn't had a haircut in 10 days. I was in Florida helping move my mother from Orlando out to Salt Lake City as she enters the crescendo of her life. And I'm constantly overbooked today. My oldest son is receiving his sacrament in the Catholic Church, confirmation, 2 years of study. And I also teach that class in our church. I have 13 young 13-year-olds that are all going to be at church tonight receiving the Catholic confirmation. I need to go buy 13 confirmation cards. I need to
Oh,
go to the bank. I'm going to take out $50 for each student and write them a note that says, congratulations. I want you to take half of this and buy food for the food bank. I want you to use the other half on anything you want. And so I have a what ton of responsibility ahead of me in the next 3 hours. I got to dress 3 boys. One's going to be an ultra surfer. I got to get up there. You get the point. And so I run fast and I work this hard so that I can take
Yeah.
a couple $100 out of the bank and get them in $50 bills and write everyone a nice card because I have a responsibility in my faith
Yeah.
to create the next generation because the same
Yeah.
was done for me. And so I run at a pretty fast pace, but
Yeah.
I have a chance to leave it hopefully a legacy with these 13 kids that I've been teaching for 2 years on Sunday evenings. And I'm
Wow.
going to give them $50 and say, hey, spend it on the food bank and spend it on yourself.
Yeah.
The hopes that when they come of age, they may do the same with their kids or their
That's so
students.
good.
And so I overcommit myself,
Awesome.
but I think my creator is okay with that.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm glad you interjected that, and it might be a mutual interruptions going on here because I think we both may have a lot to say, but I certainly hope I don't cut you off ever. But let's do this, what I call a life sentence. We're going to do it real quick, probably some rapid fire stuff, so we can get get you on your way. But I got a couple life sentences here that I have you fill in the blank, okay? And I do this with everybody. It's what I was talking about earlier. When I can't let you off the hook, we're gonna pour it on you just like we do everybody else. But here we go. You're gonna finish the sentence from your perspective. So the thought here is around feedback. So you mentioned this a lot. You talked about it earlier. So here, finish this sentence. When gathering feedback for growth or improvement, things to keep in mind are.
You should never refute it, dispute it, deny it, or deflect it. Create the conditions for the other person to feel comfortable telling you their truth. Ask clarifying questions, take notes, and then decide, is that feedback helpful for you? Is it even about you? Or in some cases, it may be about someone who looks or sounds like you and isn't even about you at all.
Because we get real defensive sometimes, don't we? And sometimes I think we question the motives of the person giving the
Right.
feedback.
Right. Because they have
Although,
motives. They have motives.
sure, but I think although we probably should have, if we're in that situation to begin with, we probably invited them to give that or gave them
Yeah.
permission or trusted them at some level.
Well
So
said.
great,
Well said.
great, great insight there. All right, next one here.
This
The
is fun.
biggest, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I only have three of these, but the biggest hindrance to people taking career from accidental to intentional is.
They have a mindset that it's someone else's responsibility. People services, human resources, their boss. They have a victim mentality. They're a martyr. Well, if the company just did this, or if the products were better, or,
Sure.
act or be acted upon, have a plan or become part of someone else's. Recognize that you're never in the room when your career is decided for you.
Yeah.
So you must take deliberate control of your career and think more long term. Most of us will work 50 years, 21 to 81, give or take a couple of years. And so you're going to have a lot of careers within your career, and you need to take sole responsibility for it.
Yeah, it's good. And I think I even heard you mention, I might butcher this, but I tried to take notes about it. But you mentioned something about some qualities and characteristics, and this is a side note, but of someone who really flourishes and really prospers and is fulfilled in their career is that they're deliberate, they're intentional, and they take role ownership. And I know that you talk a lot about all of those, and we're going to get into some strategies here in a minute of the book because I love the 10 strategies, and I wish we could get all 10. Okay, here we go. Last one. Blank is an area I have significantly grown in as a person.
I'm struggling on which answer I want to share with you, not an answer.
Multiple areas of growth. I like it. I like the
I
transparency.
am less judgmental than I was in my teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. I'm 55, soon to be 56. What I realize is everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a hidden story. Everyone's got a journey, a struggle, a different upbringing, different levels of trauma or confidence. And so when I am struggling with someone's personality, when I'm struggling with someone's character or competence or leadership style or communication style or personality style, I am increasingly asking myself, I wonder why they do that. Because people behave the way they do for a reason, usually because of their upbringing. And so I am improving and being more forgiving, more pre-forgiving, and a little less judgmental on people because you never know someone's journey or someone's story.
Yeah. And so what do you think for people listening now who maybe we can help them not wait till they're in their 50s to get there? What do you say you could have maybe done differently to check in and maybe get honest with some of yourself
Yeah.
to be
How,
better at that earlier, you think?
I'm very clear on this. Recognize early in life that, I can be jealous. I can be envious. I can be petty. I can be vindictive. I'm a human. It doesn't mean I'm a sociopath. It means I'm human, but I'm also self-aware. So I could have asked myself, okay, so right now, am I just jealous of their work ethic? Am I jealous of the fact that, they read 5 books versus went on vacation? And so I just have to ask my motive. Why am I behaving this way toward that person? Because usually it could probably flowed out of jealousy or insecurity or envy.
Yeah. I mean, it can get pretty I guess the volcano can get bubbling whenever we have the right level of ambition and aspiration, and then we mix that with the jealousy you might be talking about, the envy.
Yeah.
Maybe we're trying to outrun and we're trying to nudge people kind of off the track a little, emotionally or psychologically. So I think you're right. Like your greatest strength might have maybe become part of your weakness as well.
Always,
Yeah.
always. Your greatest strengths always, when overplayed, become your biggest weaknesses. Well said.
Wow, I'm glad you said that. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit more?
Sure.
Going off track a little, but yeah, I like
Yeah.
what you just said.
Well, I think it's very true, right? Is my biggest strength is I am a strong, bold, confident communicator. I speak for a living. I host 3 podcasts, an iHeartRadio program. I speak on stage, thousands of people. And so I have a pretty big personality. And that's good when you're standing on stage in front of 7,000 people. It's not so good when you're in a small book club or you're in a small team meeting or you're in the wife with your wife in the car and your voice and personality are like this. And so I have to be very careful to calibrate. Is this helping me? Is it helping others? Is it working for me? Is it working for others? And so I have to be mindful of sometimes lowering my voice, calming down, changing my cadence, because what is my biggest strength, which is I'm a powerful leader. I can
Hmm.
inspire people to action. I can also create anxiety. I can intimidate people. I can put people into submission. And that's not what a leader wants to do. So I would argue your listeners and viewers should sit down and inventory what are your strengths? And then ask yourself, in what circumstance does this become a weakness? Does this inhibit me from building trust? Does it
Yeah.
inhibit me from influencing people or creating the conditions to where they might be more vulnerable or
Yeah.
share with me something tender that they might feel judged by me?
That's
It's
good.
it's classic across all of us.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you might agree too that as men and as leaders, part of our responsibility is to be the thermostat in whatever environment. And so I think not all rooms need to be the same temperature, right?
Well said.
So when we go to work, our thermostat could be set on something different than when we get home. And we got to be able to juggle that just like we do at
Yeah.
home. Make sense?
Emotional and physical self-regulation are necessities for all of us to be able to be present, which is tough for me in the circumstance I'm in, and it's different every couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay, good. No, it's good, man. I think we got a solid footing for this, and we're going to get into your book because I want people on this program that's listening to go get a copy. But we're going to get there. Man, you mentioned so you got in early at Franklin Covey, and you built a large portion of, and we're responsible for a lot of that growth. Let's say built teams, like
Yeah.
cultures, like you cast
Yeah.
vision, like all the good stuff. Um, is there one thing maybe you could have done differently aside from maybe be less judgmental and jealous and those kinds of things we talked about? Is there something you could have done maybe that you think would have positioned you or prepared you for transition into leadership from where you started in the organization to where you ended up? Kind of because that progression was kind of a hockey stick from what I can gather. So
Yes.
anything you
Yeah.
could have done maybe in that early in that process that somebody can take away?
Yes. I think in most organizations, the way you become a leader is you are plucked because you were the most competent individual contributor. You were the top salesperson, so you became the sales leader. You were the most creative digital designer, so you became the art director. You were the best dental hygienist, so you became the leader of the dental hygienist. And rarely do the competencies that make you the best salesperson make you the best sales leader. In fact, they're usually inversely correlated.
That's good.
And so I think it's important for everyone who wants to move into leadership to recognize that as a leader, your primary mindset needs to be, my job is to achieve results with and through other people. I'm not the genius in the room. It's not my way or the highway. There used to be a joke when I was the chief marketing officer at FranklinCovey. I spent 25 years in this company. There was a joke, best idea wins as long as it's Scott's.
There you go.
And so I had to create a level of humility that when I moved into leadership, my job was not to solve all the problems and be the genius in the room. My job was to be the talent magnet. It was to demonstrate humility and confidence to be able to hire people who were smarter than me, technically more competent, higher educated, better at everything, and to have me become mature enough to still be confident to realize my job is to be a talent magnet and then unleash their genius in the company, break down systems, stop the politics, and pollinate them throughout the organization. And I wasn't mature enough to understand that until I was about 48. Just saying.
Man, yeah.
There's a
But
book I read by Liz Wiseman called Multipliers.
yeah,
Best leadership book
good.
I've ever read. And in order to be the multiplier of other people's talent, you have to understand, when are you accidentally diminishing other people? She has 9, I think it is, archetypes: the idea fountain, the always on, the pace setter, the protector, the perfectionist, the optimist, and on and on. And they're often your strengths, but when they are overplayed, they diminish other people. And if you want to be the multiplier of other people's talent, you first have to understand, how are you accidentally diminishing other people?
Yeah.
Phenomenal book, Multipliers.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. And once you get to that pinnacle point in your career and you're at the kind of the culmination of your leadership toward the end of your career, and I know you're still doing some work there, but when you were at the top of the top, title wise on the business card, let's say,
Yeah.
So when you walked out that particular proverbial door, what were your words of encouragement to maybe your predecessor, or what kind of guidance did you give? What advice did you give? Was there any sort of thing? Because I know you're still engaged, but I wonder, when you passed the baton, was there any sort of parting shot that you gave them that would set them up for success?
You know, my departure was very amicable. And like you mentioned, I'm still a compensated ambassador for the company, and I host several podcasts for them, and on and on and on. I'm going to actually answer your question differently. Um, I started at the front line and earned my way up into the C-suite. This was not an easy effort, right? I was from the East Coast. This was a Utah company. I was the single Catholic boy from Orlando that moved to Provo, Utah. Do the math.
Yeah,
This is
man.
a public company where religion does not matter, but I was the only non-Latter-day Saint on the executive team. Your religion does not matter in this company. This is a public company, but it's a Utah company, right? And so that's just the kind of way the math worked. Again, your religion did not matter and does not matter at FranklinCovey. However, I worked for the CEO directly for 10 years, a man of unimpeachable integrity and competence. And one day after an executive team meeting, he walked past me on the way to the bathroom and gave me one piece of feedback. It was the only piece of feedback he gave me in 10 years. He looked at me and he said, "Scott, you make too many declarative statements." And he walked out. What he meant is, "Scott, you're always first to raise your hand. Scott, you always have the solution. Scott, you're always right. Scott, you always speak." And he wanted me to be more inquisitive, to be a little less impulsive, and to listen to other people's point of views. You know, my confidence sometimes comes across as arrogance. My wife would say more than sometimes. And so that was great advice that I got. And I hope that my modeling in those last few years were to be more inquisitive and less declarative, to be more open, to have my mind change, to be more agile mentally, to recognize that, when most of us say we have 30 years of experience, what we mean is we have 1 year of experience repeated 29 times.
Yeah.
And we have to be a little more just self-aware of, is the way I did it the last decade the way everybody else should do it for the next decade? Sometimes yes, most times no.
Yeah. I love it. I like the way you kind of redirected that a little bit, that answer. And yeah, I that's great because I think we as people, um, sometimes I think those I don't know what I want to say, those self assessments of our areas of growth or weaknesses or just flat out downfalls, I think swirl around in our mind. We just don't verbalize them or own them or admit, maybe we're in denial. So in your moments of honesty with yourself, you probably thought about that before he ever said those words. You probably thought, okay, maybe I rub people, because it wasn't a mystery that maybe some
You're giving
people
me too
were
much
rubbed the
credit.
wrong way, right? And so in your
I
mind,
know,
you're thinking that probably shouldn't have gone that way, but whatever, and
you're
move
being
on.
very gracious. I hope that is true, but I'm not sure it did. Sometimes we need people to talk straight to us and call us out, and that wasn't his style. His value was more sort of harmony and democracy.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
wish he had talked straight to me more often, because I
okay,
probably would have become more aware of my blind spots. This was a blind spot for me. I thought as a chief marketing officer that my job was to have solutions and be creative, and it was.
yeah,
The problem is I spoke so charismatically sometimes and so boldly that I shut down other competent, viable voices in the room,
yeah.
and I was generally unaware of it. It was a blind spot for me.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that's good. You're being honest. I mean, I appreciate that. And I wonder too, some people, I guess, when you talk about self-awareness a lot too, so the more we can get better at being aware in our own mind of how we're impacting others when we speak. And you can definitely tell if by body language, if by nothing else, the reception you're getting from what you're saying. So jump into this one, give me some insight and some context and maybe some just some wisdom behind what I'm about to ask you, because you talk some about the hardest lesson for you. Not the hardest, I mean, hyperbole, of course, but one of the hardest lessons was to distinguish between efficient and effective. I think I've heard you talk about that. What can you help the listeners? Because we all want to be busy. We all say we're busy. Are we productive? Do we confuse those two concepts, or have you ever? And what can you do to help us not confuse those?
This is, in fact, the most profound learning I took from my now 29 years associate with the Franklin Covey. When I was the chief marketing officer, by the way, Dr. Covey died, passed about 11 years ago.
Mm.
I would often be called by the press asking to interview me on Dr. Covey's seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Efficient People. And I would say, well, no, the book is actually called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Mm.
sold 50 million copies. I think we use those words efficiency and effectiveness interchangeably,
Hmm.
understandably, right? The fact is, they have very little in common, and
Hmm.
both of them are valuable. I am a very efficient person. I wake up at 4 a.m. every day. I write columns and articles and do podcasts and write books and run a talent agency that I own and do 3 podcasts that I host and have 3 sons and you name it. And I'm a very efficient person. I'm the kind of guy that, on Saturdays, I wash my car at 6 and I wake the yard at 7 and mow the lawn at 8 and spray the yard at 9. And by 10, I'm ready for breakfast. I mean, I'm a fatiguingly hardworking person. And that's likely where all my success in life has come from. The problem is people like me that have an efficiency paradigm, an efficiency mindset, we tend to treat those in our life the same way. That we unload the dishwasher, that we take out the garbage cans, that we use our email. You cannot be efficient with people. You can only be effective. And so my advice to everyone, as my puppy barks in the background, I apologize,
It's
he's
okay.
excellent, is that you have to know when to be efficient and when to be effective. As Dr. Covey said, with people, fast is slow and slow is fast.
Mm.
Being efficient is not a bad thing. But it is when you're having a high stakes conversation. It is a bad thing if you believe, like I do, that as leaders, we are in the relationship business. And so you have to know when to be slow and when to be fast,
Yeah,
when
I
to be
agree.
efficient, when to be effective.
And that's good. And you do some coaching and I think in some obviously speaking and how, I guess how do we I have a two-part question. So you also, when you're hyper efficient, I think it sets expectations for people to be the same, correct? Like we're always, I would assume we're expecting others to either understand or get alongside and fall in line with our level of efficiency. And then that leads us down a dark path. But how do we get maybe the people we lead to understand effectiveness? Because you're not saying to trump one over the other, but I would say that maybe they have a harder time getting that part of it, right? I mean, we can run really fast, but if there's no productivity or no end benefit, right? Then how is it effective? So talk about that.
Not everyone should be a leader of people. Not everyone should be a commercial airline pilot. Not everyone should be an anesthesiologist. Not everyone should be a leader of people because it is really hard. Because you have to model all the behavior that you want your team members to replicate. Dr. Covey said, be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic. So I would say there's two answers to your question. One is we all have ingrained personality traits. We all have automatic responses that have been, replicated tens of thousands of times. Sit your team down and have a transparent conversation. Hey, you know that I love a good crisis. If I'm cooking one up, please call me out. You know that I tend to rush to judgment. If you see that, please call me out, maybe in private. So I think it's important to hang a lantern on your problems and talk about them. That doesn't mean you're licensing bad behavior. It means that you're comfortable and vulnerable enough. By the way, vulnerability is
Yeah.
a leadership competency. It's a
Mm.
great career competency where you make it not taboo, but you make it comfortable for your
Hmm.
team members to know what your strengths and your weaknesses are and to coach you on them. Yes, coach up, maybe in private, not always in public, but also then to recognize that you need to model all the behaviors you want to see in your team members. If you want them to be effective with relationships, then you need to work that muscle. If you want them to tell the truth and to be on time and to forecast properly and to offer an apologies and to take responsibility, you have to do the same.
Hmm.
This is the best advice I can give everyone today is be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic. It's why most people should not be leaders of people because it requires you to have an enormous level of humility.
Hmm.
Remember, confidence flows from humility, and you
Mm.
need to be the model of all these behaviors we're discussing.
Wow, that might be the that might be the cornerstone of the podcast right there. That statement of that confidence. Say that again.
Yeah, confidence flows from humility.
Flows from humility.
Arrogance, people that are humble can't be arrogant. And
Right.
so when I think of, historically, when I heard the word humility, I would have thought quiet, shy, retiring.
Yeah.
I would have thought they never promote themselves. You know what? I eat you for lunch.
Right.
And then as I matured, I realized humility isn't a personality trait, it's a mindset.
Mm.
You can still be humble and say, I am proud of my book. I'm proud of that keynote. Humble people usually use the word we versus
Hmm.
me. But I have also met people that are so humble, they can never take credit. I have interviewed people that are incapable of saying, well, here's what I did. It's always us. No, you did some things too. I'm
Yeah.
fine hearing that. I want to know, what is your genius? We all have superpowers.
Yep. Yep.
But I do believe that humility and confidence can absolutely coexist, and in fact, must.
That's so good. So good. All right, we're going to get into the strategies because I know you're strapped for time and we're going to probably rifle through these, but that's why they
Great.
have a rewind button on these podcasts. All right, so there's 10 of them. We're not going to hit them all, but the first one I have to go into strategy one, to know your professional values. And you talk a lot about that. And I would think that personal and professional values must coincide as well. And there's got to be some alignment there because one will beget the other. So how do you, I don't know, talk about some of your professional values and maybe do you think people struggle with identifying those and quantifying and verbalizing and casting those out to be able to live by?
So this could be an hour-long podcast in itself.
I know.
The book is called Career on Course, and the first strategy is know your professional values. But that assumes you also have personal values. You know, all the values experts on TikTok and Instagram are kicking my ass because they don't think you should have two sets of values. Well, I am hereby anointing myself a values expert as well.
There we go.
Here's what I think. I think you do need two sets of values. I think you have a set of personal values and a set of professional values. For example, I think most people, when you ask them, what are your values, they would think of something extemporaneous to say: freedom, voice, liberty. I don't know, make it up.
Sure.
But I don't think if you asked them the next week what their values were, they would use the same words. So you need to take the time to identify and write down, yes, with a pen or a pencil, what your values are. My personal values are purpose, health, integrity, loyalty, positivity, abundance, and learning. PHILPAL. It spells the acronym PHILPAL. And every decision I make in my personal life is through the lens of my personal values. I mentioned I'm Catholic. We go to church at 10:30 on Sunday morning. My number one value is purpose. Saturday nights, no sleepovers. We iron our clothes. We write our checks. We go to bed so we're not cranky in the morning. And we go to mass on Sunday mornings. After mass, whatever we want to do, right? But I'm very clear on my values: purpose, health, integrity, loyalty, positivity, abundance, and learning. Those are my 7 personal values. I've committed to the memory, and it's the lens through which I make the decisions in my personal life. My professional values are very different. Number 1 is maximize my income. And I am very comfortable and confident saying it in front of any environment, including my boss. I work to pay for my family. My number 2 professional value is to work with and for an organization that I am proud of. I could have worked for a lot of companies that earned more money, but I liked the FranklinCovey company. I respected what they stood for. My number 2 value was to work with and for a company that I respected and was proud to associate with. My number 3 professional value was to work with people that I liked and loved and who liked and loved me.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why 70 of our 98 wedding guests were colleagues of mine from FranklinCovey. My wife called it a corporate retreat. And I said, no, actually, hun, these are my lifelong friends. They all like me. They have forgiven me. They have tolerated me. And I've done the same. So I think you need 2 sets of values, because when you are in sales and you are frustrated with your revenue and your commission, and you should be living in your territory, but you are not because your number 1 personal value is family and you want your kids to be near your aging grandparents. Now you know why your income isn't producing like it should, because you haven't moved to Iowa when your territory is there and you live in South Dakota and it takes 10 hours to drive. So you only go once a month, not 3 times a week. It's an outlier example, but you get the point.
Yeah.
When you have your personal professional values written out, only then can you determine when they are in alignment and when are they in conflict.
Yeah.
And is there anything at all to do about that?
And it's good. So good. And I can't help but think it might have had a positive impact on the Great Resignation if some people would have been in line with what you're talking about.
Totally. Everybody left for $10,000 and they're all pendulum swinging back because they hadn't thought through, do I value culture? Do I value equity? Do I value leadership? Do I value career opportunities? Do I value international assignments? Do I value, but when you have your professional values written down, then the grass isn't always greener. It might be, but now you are making deliberate, intentional decisions versus just someone called you, offered you $10,000 more because it was easier to poach you than it was to train you. And you left, you never thought through, is this really what I value? Is my number 1 goal maximizing my income? Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Right. And like you said, you want to work for a company that you're proud of, right? And that that you respect and value their values. And that hasn't happened for a while. I would say maybe it does happen some, but I think there's a lot of it that isn't happening in a lot of our next generation workforce. So yeah.
It's because I think people, by and large, John, they think about what's next. They don't think about what's after what's next. And in the book, I very intentionally talk about think of your career in terms of decades, not in terms of months or years. Be very thoughtful. Where do you want to be 30 years from now? What does that role look like? And then backcast and
Yeah.
decide what are the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 jobs I'm going to need to earn the talent, the respect, and the competency to get in that job. People think about what's next,
Yeah.
not what's after what's next.
Well, for being such a future thinker, I think you should probably write a book about reverse engineering. Because
That's
I
what
don't
it
know that
is.
people are quantifying or not. I don't know that people conceptualize tactically how to do that. I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
chapter 4, right? Strategy
Okay.
4
Okay.
is illustrate and recalibrate your long-term plan. And in
Okay.
the book, there are 10 exercises. And this one is literally a multi-decade map to say, if you want to be the CEO when you're 60, then you probably need to be in the C-suite. You probably need to be an EVP, an SVP, a VP, a director. You probably need supply chain. You probably need marketing experience. You need to hire and fire. You need to know how to manage a P&L. You get it. And that's all reverse engineering.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
therefore, you have a path. I had a 40-year map,
Yeah.
nerd alert, that I wrote on the back of a TGIF Fridays placemat when I was 23. And I mapped out my 40-year career
Yeah.
with my age, the dates, the titles, and the compensation of all my roles. And I revisited it every year. And it really comes down to have a plan or become part of someone else's.
Right. And and I love that you said, and I knew you said that, and I have that written down, that quote, to be a part of someone else's if you don't have one. And that's big time. But look, you understood that because I don't know, our generation, yeah, we grew up with a microwave, but that was in its infant stages. Now everything is a second away. Now everything happens yesterday. Like we aren't wired now. These generations are not wired to plan 40 years ahead. Are they?
Well, I think our values are different. I think I don't know your age. I'm older than you clearly, but
I'll be 52, so not much.
one of the strong values of our generation was loyalty, loyalty to company. My father worked at Lockheed Martin for 36 years. It's not a value of the new generation. And that isn't a disparaging. It's just, most careers now are 18 months. So when you do the math, the
A
average
career.
professional is going to have 26 jobs in
Yeah.
their life. That's 26 cultures to learn. That's 26 different leaders to understand. I can't even comprehend it.
No.
But I think the difference is people are way too opportunistic in their careers. I once watched a Franklin Covey video that was called The Law of the Harvest, and it highlighted an Idaho potato farmer.
Hmm.
And he talked about the law of the harvest. I'm not a potato farmer or have even been on a farm. But what I understand is that when you are a potato farmer, every 2 or 3 years, you don't plant potatoes. You plant typically a money losing crop, but it replenishes the soil that had been stripped dry of the nutrients so that the next year you can come back and plant potatoes that are bigger and better and more expensive. They plant alfalfa or wheat or something that doesn't
Mm-mm.
yield the money, but it replenishes the soil. I think in most people's careers, they are harvesting, not planting. They're always opportunistically thinking about what's next and sort of a bit of an entitled behavior. That's going to irritate some of your listeners, but I just have 30 decades of experience to say, ask yourself, am I in planting mode or am I in harvesting mode? And how you ask yourself is, have I indisputably delivered on results that everyone agrees upon? And have I demonstrated a track record that warrants me now moving to the next role? I don't think you should misinterpret that as wait your turn or just be patient. No, you want to have a bit of impatience,
Yeah.
but you should indisputably have evidence that you have a track record of success. That does
Yeah.
not happen in 18 months. I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't. And don't apologize for the entitlement word. We use that a lot here. And I think we could revolutionize corporate America if we just did away with the entitled victim mentality that I think a lot of people have now. So you couple the victimized element and the entitled element, and you have what you have now. And like you said, everybody's opportunistic, and so we're everything, the next best thing, the next sweetest thing, the next sexy thing, right?
Can I tell you, I once was involved with an organization that was a primarily Caucasian organization, primarily male-led, not a very diverse organization. And there was a Afro-Latino woman, Black and Latino, that had a meteoric rise in the organization. Meteoric. Became the highest earning sales producer in the company. And there were many people that thought she was being given preferential treatment because of DE&I initiatives, things like that. No, the woman delivered on like 17 quarters of revenue every quarter after quarter, and she had a meteoric rise because she put her head down and delivered on her revenue goal as a salesperson, and she earned her way to it.
Give them no other choice but to promote you. Give them no choice but to choose
Right.
you.
Right.
All right. So we're going to jump ahead since we talked about four, and I was going to talk about self-awareness, but we kind of already did that. But you got to get the book. I mean, strategy 3 is really good, but I like
It's the most
strategy
important
7.
chapter in the whole book.
What's that?
It's the most important chapter in the whole book.
Number 3?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, then let's do that one.
Yes.
Self-awareness, study yourself.
Yes.
And it could actually bleed into what I was going to talk about in number 7 about leading your leader, because if you're self-aware and you've studied your goals, your vision, your values, and you've studied what you're good at and how they align with the corporate culture and vision, then you're more likely to feel confident to do that step of leading before you have a title or leading your leader. So go into some of that, and maybe if you can bridge those, even though they're 4 chapters apart.
If I have fatigued anybody, please check back in, because this will be the fire of this entire conversation. In more than 3 decades that I've been a formal leader of people, I have interviewed, I don't know, somewhere north of 400 people for jobs, not on podcasts, like sat down with a resume across the table and interviewed easily 400 people for jobs. I've hired, I think, 87 people, and I have fired about 17. So I've had the honor of hiring 87, and I've had the responsibility of terminating 17 people. Listen very closely. Not one of those 17 people in 3 decades was fired because they lacked the technical competency to do the job. Every one of them had the skills, the degree, or the training. They all were fired because they lacked self-awareness. They had no idea what it was like to work for them, lead them, be led by them, be on a Zoom call with them, stand in a trade show booth with them, go on a ride along with them, manager. They had no idea how much they talked, how much they stole credit, how little they knew about their own personality style. Every single termination was because they had these massive blind spots that they were incapable or unwilling to address. If you want to take your career from accidental to intentional, you will study your behavior. You'll get to the root cause. What is your origin story? Why do you do what you do? Why do you feel the need to always raise your hand first? Why do you feel the need to sit at a table with 8 colleagues on a full day sales conference and never speak a word? Why do you always have to go last? Or why do you agree with the last person that spoke because they were the most charismatic? The more you can study yourself and say, is this helpful? Is this helping my career? Is this helping the company's goals? Am I doing the job I was hired for? What? The job changed? Okay, bring it on.
Yeah.
I mean, when someone says to me, not my job, I say, not your company. You're out.
Yeah. Well, forgive me for jumping in, but it seems like we just made full circle conversation, because whenever Dr. Covey made the declarative statement to you, clearly you may not have been self-aware enough to know that about yourself, but somebody spoke into your life, poured into you, invested, and you actually listened and course corrected. Now, the people you terminated, I would like to assume you probably gave some ample warnings, or maybe
Lots
some,
of
I mean,
course.
lots of red flags,
Yes.
lots of,
It's incumbent
caution.
upon you. It's incumbent as a leader is to constantly giving people feedback on their blind spots and moving outside your comfort zone.
They're not coachable.
Many of them were hearing it for the first time even though it was the eighth time because they were such blind spots. To your earlier point, the connection between strategy 3, which is study yourself, and strategy, I think it's 7, take the lead with your leader, is I generally think people need to be a little more forgiving of their leaders. Leadership is tough. You have no idea what kind of pressure your leadership is under. You have no idea what her relationship is with her boss. You have no idea what's going on in her world, how her life has changed, how her world has changed, how she needs you to change. Just because someone is your leader does not mean they are competent to be your leader. Harvard Business Review did a research study, John, that said the average age that someone is promoted into their first management position is age 30. Yet the average age they received their first formal leadership development training, age 42. So there is a 12-year gap where they are just creating havoc across the organization, doing the best they can with no training. I don't think most bad leaders are bad people. I think they are undertrained and they don't know how to set goals. They don't know how to have high courage conversations that leave your self-esteem still intact. They don't know how to coach you differently than I want to be coached. They don't know how to translate goals into behaviors. They're usually not trained and immature. So in many cases, if you want your career to advance, you have to take the lead with your leader. You have to say, John, I want to get promoted here. And I want you to be my biggest champion. I know I am doing things that are annoying to you. I know there must be things I am working on that you wished I would stop. I know there are some things that you think I have the talent for, but I haven't shown it yet. Could you tell me all these things so I can write them down? Because I need you to be my biggest champion. And I want to build a track record where I can get promoted inside or outside. And I also want to make you look good. These are the kind of conversations that you have to have with your leader because most leaders aren't mature enough to have them with you.
And we need to do that more than once a year at the end where we have an assessment of our performance. I mean, that's just recapping the facts that have happened and transpired. It's not checking in monthly.
It's the difference between thinking your leader owns your career and you owning your career. I don't ever want to be ambushed during a performance appraisal.
That's great.
I want to know, what do you think of me? Now, I may not agree with it all. I may decide I'm going to quit. I may decide you're not competent. I'm going to go somewhere else in the organization. But I know that if I'm going to get promoted, I'm going to need your recommendation. And I at least need to be able to say, can I just tell you, I had 4 conversations with John in the last year about ways I could improve. And every time he said, Scott, everything is fine. You're just fine. Look, I wrote them down in my journal so that John is telling you I haven't delivered. That is because John lacked the courage or the skill to give me the feedback. I asked for it 4 times. I refused to have John interrupt my career in this company. You need to train John, not me. That's the kind of conversation people need to own with their leader.
That in a nutshell describes your book too. I mean, just that career on course, like to go from accidental to intentional right there. What you just said, it encapsulates taking ownership and not waiting for somebody else. I mean, we could go off on a tangent about blame and whose fault and whose job it is and all that. And that's the problem. But all right, well, I've gone longer than I thought, and I really wanted to hit strategy 10. So dig your well before you're thirsty. That is something that resonated with me. And you mentioned about referrals being 80% of job placement. People are waiting till they're thirsty. Am I right? Empower us right now.
The recruiting science shows that on average, 85% of all new hires are referrals from someone inside the company or a network. They are not the result because your resume was well written and it was scanned in and the algorithm matched the job description.
Yeah.
I was giving a keynote this week in Nebraska at a large healthcare company, and they said that 65% of all their new hires were referrals. Here's why I wrote the chapter. Harvey Mackay, a very famous thought leader and author, wrote a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And it's why I wrote the chapter after this title. I spent 25 years inside of the FranklinCovey company. I knew all 1,000 of their global associates. But those 1,000 people weren't going to be the people that got me my next career, my next gig. So I realized 3 years prior to me leaving the company, I don't have a network. I am extremely networked inside of this company because I'm spending all my time in the executive suite, but I don't know anybody. And so I knew I was going to leave 3 years before I did. And so for 3 years, I maniacally built my LinkedIn, my TikTok, my Instagram, my Facebook, you name it, and started building connections and writing articles and writing blog posts and taping videos and giving, providing, sharing, and building my network. It wasn't just connecting to people opportunistically in the hopes they might help. No, it was, I wrote 75 LinkedIn articles. I wrote 100 Inc.com columns. I shared content and put myself out there and built this network that now I can't even maintain because it's actually, quite frankly, so big and so rewarding. That did not come by me being opportunistic. It came by me adding value, by teaching people the things that I've learned. And so you're going to need the network. You've got to start building it before you need it with the mindset of, how can I help you? How can I help you? How can I help you? Who can I connect? What can I do? And then it paid off for me in spades once I needed it to help me.
Because it's easier to do that when you don't need it as much, right? Like it's easier to be the giver when you're not desperate.
You can't build a network in the 4 weeks that your severance is there. You've got to have it dug, right?
No, so you kind of are an Idaho potato farmer then, it sounds like, because you did plant those 2 years in advance.
Well, 3 years actually, but
3 years
yeah,
in advance.
I would say I was an early bloomer in some ways. I was a late bloomer in other ways, and I'm really trying to take all the wisdom that was offered to me at Franklin Covey and through all these podcast interviews I've done, like you have done, and do my best to apply them in my life.
Well, okay. So we need to know where to go to, obviously we can go find your book and I'm going to have the link in the notes, but we can go anywhere books are sold to get your book. But anything you want us to do to make you feel like your work is landing? Like, what can we do?
Sure. I want you to take the time to sit down and identify your personal values. This is not done in an hour. Took me a weekend. And so take the time to write them down, rewrite them. Maybe there's 3, maybe there's 7. Do not pick them based on what you think someone else will think of them. No one's opinion matters. These are your values, and you should not write them because you think they'll sound smart at a cocktail party. I don't give a flying flip, John, what you think about my values. And then once you have clarified your personal values, then move over and decide what your professional values are. In the book, there are 10 strategies. The book is Career on Course. And each strategy has a fairly extensive exercise. Some can be done in an hour. Some take a day or 2. But I think the first step is to go identify your values, and you will see your time, your treasure, your talent, your relationships, your peace, your anxiety, all of it will come into better alignment. This sounds like a pithy phrase, know your values. But when you can actually have a conversation and say, well, yeah, my values are purpose, health, integrity, loyalty, positivity, abundance, and learning, people will say, what? Yeah. And look at my life, and they're all aligned with those. Look behind me. There's 1,000 books. One of my values is learning, right? Look at my bank account. It's abundance. Look at my Sunday mornings and my Saturday evenings. It's purpose, right? Look at health, integrity, hopefully. Loyalty, sometimes to a fault, but it's a value. And I'd rather be burned by being too loyal to someone than be accused of not being loyal. So I've thought through mine, and I hope your listeners and viewers will do the same.
Well, I tell you what, it's been an honor, and there's been a lot of good information, and it's been, selfishly, it's helped me, and so I'm very thankful that you made time, given your schedule, and I appreciate you being here. My listeners will as well. We will continue to follow your work. We will continue to get your books and get better. So, with that, audience, he has been the one and only Scott Miller. We've been last in line. Be blessed.